Do 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 do. Let's see if people can hear me. Hello, it's me. Do do do. You don't have to bring a notebook. Hello, hello, hello. Whoa, 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 whoa. Yeah. So each week, this is going to be like less text today, and then the following weeks will be a bit more text. And I'm going to post each of these like in PDF on the After Hours page when we get there. Don will help you.
Dawn's never in my house, though.
That's what my mom said she had kids for. Make sure you can read the black text. Scoot up. There's spots right here.
No, I can't. Yeah, I can sit up here.
Hello. Can I hear? Can I hear myself? Can I hear myself? I'll tell you what, on video, my hair sure is receding a lot more when I look down. Yeah, I can hear myself. I can hear myself. Hey, Ava. Hey, David. Hi, Linda. Kit Enriquez. I could bring people on camera with me? What happens when you bring someone on camera? Should I bring someone on camera, you guys? Can I kick them off after I bring them on? I don't want to bring anyone on.
I'm afraid my kids will find that.
If not, the adult stuff will.
Also true.
Hello. Glad you can hear me, because I did this all by myself. Hootie's not here. My camera operator is here. Nope. Nope. We're just running the sound through the ATEM, through that thing. And I started the thing. Can you guys read this? Make sure you can read this.
You can read it. This is starting to go bad.
I know, I couldn't sit. I tried. I'm like, the second row is pretty much my buffer zone. Third row.
Splinter out today and couldn't see it, so he had to get it for me.
Out of your eye?
My hand.
Oh. Oh man, that table. It's wobbly though.
Like I said, I could see.
Oh, yeah.
Not on me.
It's okay. Oh, even better.
So Ryan,
Yes, sir.
that one canopy looks like it ripped off the top.
Oh, it did for sure. Yeah, I did it. The canopy, right? Not the umbrellas.
Yeah, the umbrellas.
Oh, one of the umbrellas?
Yeah, the one if you're looking at the back to the door of the front left, it says barely hanging on. It's not attached to the
Oh,
anymore. It's like slid halfway down
all the dangle arms? Okay, I'll have to check it out. Bree, what are you watching? You're right there. You're going to watch online. That's just for people to watch. I'm not talking to online people today. I'm literally going to talk around the camera.
I want to see the comments too.
Oh, nobody's comment. Nobody's allowed to comment.
I will comment to stuff.
block comments.
You can have block comments.
I'll bet you can block comments. We'll start in about, we'll just give people a couple minutes because punctuality is not a strong suit of Christian people. What?
Block comments.
Yeah, you gotta, I know I can delete comments. I don't know if I can, you can on YouTube for sure.
I know you do.
You can on Facebook? Let's block these comments. We don't want commenters.
Hi, Don.
YouTube will teach you how to
Hi,
do it.
Reed.
You guys are goofballs. Hi, Miss Jocelyn. Are you still at the party? Are you at the party? The birthday party? Nora's birthday. What's up, Easy E? See, I told you, church people, punctuality is not their strong suit. I just got through saying that, and we're already streaming, but. What's up, Q? Good evening, Q. Good to see you on here. How are you doing, Q? Hope you're doing well. Like I said, we're just letting some people linger in. It was a little storm and Norman out there. Storm and Norman. Miss Darcy working today? And they are working her to the bone.
O'clock tonight, so.
They are working her to the bone. There can't be that many people bowling right now, right? In the midst of a pandemic.
I'll come out at nighttime, she says.
The vampires and teenagers. Nothing good happens after the sun goes down. Nothing good. I put it at 76 degrees.
It's perfect.
Yes.
No.
Dawn's always cold, so.
I'm okay right now.
I brought a sweater. Just
Are your toes losing feeling because it's so warm?
No, they're blue. Because she's cold.
Oh.
I'm good. It's autoimmune.
76 degrees.
It's been ours. It happens.
Did-
I'm kayaking. And I got home and it was 100 degrees out and my feet were blue.
Poor circulation. Got to stop doing those cigars.
Cigars.
Shrink your blood vessels.
What shrink your blood vessels?
Cigars. Cigarettes, cigars.
Well, smoke does.
Tar, yeah. Campfires. Hello, Nicole Rojas. 6:03-ish. We'll start right at 6:05. We'll pray, jump in, and move right along. Depending on how many people come in person tonight, hopefully not as many, because I really want to use that back room real bad. Real bad. We're not going to move back there because I have everything set up. That's why I did it up here. I thought we could see how many people will be in person versus online, and then we will be able to use that room. It'll be so cozy. Took the stage down so I don't hit my head on the ceiling.
Yay.
What?
How'd you get the TV up there?
I picked it up.
Okay.
How else would you get it up there?
Well, that's what I was sort of wondering.
Those games.
Did I got it from my dinner?
Those games, baby. Those games. Just whoop. Should I take it down after I'm done so you can just wheelie it out?
It would be.
You just got to be careful when you're going over the lips. You kind of wheelie it over. And then watch out that you don't hit the little thing that I've hit my head on about a dozen times.
Yep. I've experienced that.
You hit your head on that?
No, I've experienced the wheelie thing with
Oh.
TV card.
I was like, you're taller than I thought from up here.
No, 6 foot even.
6 foot even. 6:04 and 11 seconds. 50 seconds and we'll start. Revelation. Yeah, see back there, it'll be so cozy. It'll just be so fun in that new room. Can't wait. Can't wait. Oh, your kids just watch themselves?
They do.
It's the best. Your hair's so long.
They're like, okay.
Your hair is so long.
I know.
It's crazy. How long are you going?
I'm gonna go middle of my back.
That's what it used to be back in the day, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
You-
2 more years.
2 years?
2 more years.
That's a lot of
Your hair grows on average 6 inches a year.
Really? Can you tell that to right here?
I did buy it, but it won't.
That's a special place. That's not gonna grow that fast.
The comments are gone. This is actually
The comments are still here.
They're here.
Hello, Jay. What's up, brother Mike? Kai, Renee. Oh, 6:05, 10 seconds. We're not waiting any longer. Let's get cracker lacking. Just so you guys know, on Facebook and YouTube, usually on Sundays, I interact a bit with the people here and I talk more to the camera. But for tonight, for this study in particular, I'll be reacting more with the people here and the camera, anything that's related to the stream, I will check after everything is over. And each week we are going to be gathering questions. So this is obviously the first week. It's going to be an introduction week to the book of Revelation. Please let me know if anything is going on with the audio. I set everything up myself, and I'm not a tech person. Well, I'm a tech person, but not that type of tech person. So if you can't hear me, if I'm not loud enough, turn on up. Bob Pizzuti, welcome. Glad that you're here from the Northern Kingdom. I'm supposed to say something about Darby. I'm guessing that's John Darby, and I don't know if you don't like, are you a John Darby fan, Bob? Are you not a Darby fan? Because Darby is very wrong. But we're going to talk about the book of Revelation tonight. Study deep. And as I said, when I have things like questions, unfortunately at this point I won't have any camera. There won't be cameras turning around. That way it's just the audience. Here's the audience here. But I will be interacting with the people who are present live. And if you have questions, you can always post them here. And I'm going to gather all of the questions. And I'm going to answer them in pertinent weeks. The study, I really don't know exactly how long it will be. This is not a verse by verse. Yes, it was Joanna that was pre-warning me. This will not be a verse by verse study through Revelation. Otherwise, it would be a long expository style sermon series. However, it will be, hello, someone's logged in as the chapel at Fishhawk. Hello, Gary or Ree. Because that's not you, Jared. You know better. Hello, Gary or Ree, logged in as the chapel. Glad to see that you're here, chapel at Fishhawk. Hello. I'm telling everybody, if you can make sure you can see the black writing, that's about as small as it's going to get. And I know for me, I tested the third row and I couldn't do it. So, but I will read it in all the slides I'm going to make available at the end of each week. We're going to have a section for the Revelation study. So that's all online, family. Grateful to have you here. We're going to also make sure that we trim this up and put up final versions of this when it's all said and done. So I'm going to pray. We're going to jump into the introduction to Revelation with some interactions here, and you have to pardon me, Stream fam, if I'm not engaging as much as I would do normally on a Sunday, because like I said, I just want to make sure that for those who are here, they're just my favorite people right now. That's what it is, Stream people. Get in your cars next time. No, I'm just kidding. I love you. Let's pray, and we'll go in. Father, I am grateful. I'm grateful for the book of Revelation. It is a bewildering book. And we are living currently, from my perspective, in the midst of bewildering times where there are wars and rumors of wars, where there are over 1 million Uyghur Muslims being put into concentration camps and being functionally castrated, where there are famines and pandemics, where governments around the world have banned Christianity while others are trying to lift up Christianity. And people, God, you know, from the time you inspired this book, believers have been debating and arguing about how to interpret it. And there are interpretations that are prevalent in our modern era that don't find a deep historical root. I pray that we would not attach ourselves to one scholar or one camp, but rather learn how to examine and approach your word, Father, to understand why you wrote it, to whom you wrote it, and how it can then apply to our lives and our situations, especially this book, Lord, with the lamps and the dragons and the dragon heads and the horns and the seals and the plagues and the cities and the gold. Help us, God. We need your help. But this is a book that you printed, that you preserved for the well-being of your people. So give us the wisdom that comes from it over this next series of weeks. In Jesus' name, all God's kids said, Amen. So because this Bible is not a sermon, even though it's here, that's why I'm looking forward to. If we can squeeze it to that new back room, it'll be nicer just to interact more, because I know that when we sit here, we default into what's on a Sunday. But you have to just get rid of that. There's a communication in some sense as well. So let me just ask this question of those of you who are here, and you're free to chime in, and I will try to peek in over here from time to time. What comes to your mind when you hear the word or think of the book Revelation?
Celebration.
Celebration. I didn't think I'd get that one for the first. Okay. Celebration. Revelation what?
Tribulation.
Tribulation. That's a big one. Armageddon. The movie or the concept?
The concept.
Okay.
Confusion.
Confusion. Yes. Weird monsters. Yeah. The end. The end times for sure.
Mystery.
Or the end of the Bible.
Mystery. The end of the Bible. Yeah, if you're in a Bible reading plan and you make it to Revelation, you're rocking that December 30th day right there. Okay. Tribulation here. Cool. So Revelation, and like I said, there's going to be it's a hybrid of class, lecture and hopefully some encouragement. And this is the introduction. So today, we're going to talk about some of the basics about Revelation, what Revelation is. And just at the outset, I just want to say, as a pastor, it's one of those weird, not a pet peeve, but just a weird thing. It's revelation, singular, not revelations, which I often hear like, hey, can you do a sermon series on Revelations or a Bible study on Revelations? And revelation really just means what it sounds like if you just look at the word. We've loaded in these concepts, and I'm going to define a lot of these words. And if I say a word that you don't know and I don't define it, just shoot up your hand because I want to make sure I'm defining it. You're not the only one that's not going to know what it means. So for example, tribulation. It's a very popular word, and there's another word that I'm going to say a lot, so I'm just going to get it out of the way. Everyone say eschatology. Okay, it's essentially the study of end things, eschatology, and there's a bunch of derivatives of this word, eschatological, but they all just think of end times, thinking about end times, studying end times, looking at end times. Revelation, in your Bible, some of the old Bibles will call it the Revelation of John. That's incorrectly titled, and maybe you don't know this, but in your Bibles, wherever you see the bold subheadings that are above certain passages, you'll see a passage and then a bold subheading, and sometimes certain books of the Bible will have, the Revelation of John, for example, or in some of the older Bibles. Those things were not part of the original text, especially those subheadings. Those are put in there by translators to help you understand and break down the text in manageable chunks. This is a book that is about the revelation of Jesus, which means to reveal Jesus. That's the purpose of this book. The purpose of this book is not primarily to lay out a timeline of the end of the world. The purpose of this book is not primarily to give you a literal picture of what will happen at the end of the world, and we will get to that because I am aware of what the primary culture of belief is around the book of Revelation. Just by a show of hands, how many of you have read Left Behind, watched the Left Behind movies, Kirk Cameron, Nick Cage? Anybody seen those? Oh, yeah. Okay. So that is probably the most prevalent view of Revelation today. The majority of people will embrace the view of Revelation that is taught by those books, and those books were really derived from a theologian that was about 200 years ago, Darby, and it's a theological framework called dispensationalism. That's a big word that just means when Darby looked at the Bible, and then after him Scofield and Ryrie, they looked at the Bible and they said, we believe that it's broken up in dispensations, and there are 7 dispensations in the Bible, from creation to Noah, from Noah to Moses, etc., and it comes up to the end millennium age. So that's one particular way to look at it. And I'm not here to say, here's my way, which I believe is the right way. Today, as a matter of fact, the primary emphasis of today is to see the value of Revelation and to give a brief overview of the 4 main camps and how people approach the book. Because you can approach reading something very differently. We all know this from news, right? You can, let's just take everyone here. I'm not going to out you politically, but wherever you are politically, you can watch, let's say, for example, CNN or Fox News as 2 examples. And depending on where your political perspective is, that will actually change the way you hear the words that are coming across the screen. Are you tracking with what I'm saying? Yeah? Okay. So it's similar with Revelation. Oftentimes, though, we just simply approach a book of the Bible with some of maybe the mixed teachings that we've had, or maybe, and oftentimes it is a movie, because the progression went from the late 1800s, and then in 1909, the Scofield Study Bible came out, and it blew up this perspective that led to the Left Behind movies, and then people like Hal Lindsey, and then pastors who I love and adore and have learned a lot from, Chuck Smith, who founded the Calvary Chapel Church movement, the pre-tribulation rapture, and I'll describe some of these words as we go on, this dispensational way, the big word is futurist way of looking at Revelation, and we're going to come to that in a bit. This is what the majority of Christians hear. If you turn on Christian radio, you hear a sermon on Revelation, whether it's from Hagee or J. Vernon McGee, people who I love and have learned a lot from. They grew up in a particular tradition that is relatively new within the last 200 years. There are versions of this, what we'll call the futurist view of interpreting Revelation, but those are by no means the predominantly held view of how to interpret Revelation in history. So here's Revelation in a snapshot, just for us to get started. It's 22 chapters, 404 verses at conversation speed, or if you put it on a Bible app, at regular speaking speed, depending on which version of the Bible you use. It takes only about an hour and a half to read Revelation from first word to last word. The author is the Apostle John. It's what all of Christian history presumes. There's some scholars that say, well, maybe it's not the beloved disciple John, but there's no good reason to dispute that. People are often trying to look for new, unique ways to say, I found something new about the Bible. Date written, there's no for sure date written, and a lot of this will turn on to the to how you interpret Revelation, how you approach it. One of the four primary views as to if it was before 70 AD, which is when the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, or after 70 AD. It was revealed to John in a vision on the island of Patmos. It's an island off of modern-day Turkey, and it was commonly used as a prison island back then. It is the final book of the Christian Bible. And here's the main thing that we all need to take away. No matter how you approach Revelation, no matter which view, when we get to the four views of Revelation, the snapshot of Revelation is that God wins and Satan loses. This is it. The timing things, there's something called the tribulation, which is in the different ways to approach it. Some people will say there's a 7-year period where great turmoil will happen, and God's going to suck us up before we get there. It's called the rapture. And in this case, if it's before the tribulation, it's called the pre-tribulation rapture. There's one group that believes that. There's one group that's a mid-tribulation, and there's another group that's a post-tribulation. And these are big words, I understand. There are books for this. Here's a book that has the 3 views on the rapture. And it just gives you pros and cons. Here's a case with Scripture as to why some believe this, that, or that. And then there's a millennium, which is another thing we're going to get into. But the theme that all of the 4 primary interpretation views, the ways to approach Revelation, the ways to look at it, the theme is that God wins and Satan loses. Now this is why Revelation, I've grown in my fascination for it. And it was interesting because Jesse shared something right before talking to someone else about the Revelation class. What did they say about the class? Why they didn't want to study Revelation?
Because it's confusing and you're not meant to understand it anyways.
Because it's confusing and you're not meant to understand it anyways. Which I get. If you've never read the book of Revelation, there's dragons with horns and mountains and lamps and spirits and weird creatures. But if we don't approach it, we miss out on what is in the very beginning. The 3rd verse of Revelation is what I just wanted us to read here. Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy. And blessed are those who hear the words of this prophecy and keep what is written in it, because the time is near. So my question to someone who would not want to study Revelation, or at least not want to press in with as much effort as they could, my very simple question is, do you want to have God's blessing in your life? Because this is an explicit verse that says, here's one of God's blessings. A person who reads this aloud, 1.5 hours, a person who hears the words of this prophecy, and keep what is written in it, because the time is near. Now that brings me to a couple of clarifications that I do want to bring up. So here's the overarching purpose. If it's the revelation of Jesus, the purpose of this book must be to know Christ better. Because it's not the revelation of John. This is God in a vision to John while he's exiled on the island of Patmos. It is to get us and to get John to know Christ and his mission better. So in this last book of the Christian Bible, Jesus is portrayed especially as the faithful witness. He is the one who remained true to God despite tribulation. He is the present one who walks among the communities of his followers, and that's in the beginning 3 chapters of Revelation, the 7 churches. He speaks words of comfort and challenge through the Spirit. Jesus is portrayed as the Lamb who was slain and now reigns with God the Creator, sharing in the devotion and worship due to God alone. And Jesus is portrayed as the coming one who will bring God's purpose to fulfillment and reign with God among the people of God in the new heaven and earth. And you don't have to write all these down. I'm going to post PDFs of this on the chapel page. We're going to have a Revelation page on the after hour study. So each week, because these are going to get more dense as the weeks go on, I'm going to put the PDFs up there so you'll be able to download these and check them out later. We did this, what words come to mind when you hear Revelation? The reason why I ask this is because of a few things. One is there are words like the rapture. The rapture refers to the taking up of God's people. And like I said, there's debate on the timing of it. But it's not a word that we use in our modern language very often. We may use the word enraptured when you're smitten by something, but the idea of a rapture being taken up is something that is very unique to this aspect of end times. Another word is Antichrist. How many of we've all heard the word Antichrist, right? It's interesting that there are a few words that actually do not appear in the book of Revelation. There are words, and there are many words that we have totally botched their meaning. So, for example, people think of Revelation, they think of end times. Another thing that people think of when they think of Revelation is the apocalypse. The apocalypse actually means to reveal. That's what it means. It doesn't mean the end of the world. So when someone says, the apocalypse is coming, they're literally saying, if you're going by what the original authors meant when they said apocalyptic literature, it meant a revealing type of literature. And an apocalypse in the Bible is any time that God revealed himself to someone. So Isaiah saw a vision of God in Isaiah 6. That was a type of apocalypse. Paul, when he was Saul and got blown off of his donkey or horse by Jesus, that was an apocalypse, a revelation of Jesus. Jesus being revealed to him. And it's important to remember this distinction, because when you say in our current culture that Revelation talks about the apocalypse, we instantly think end of the world. And there's another, the idea of apocalypse, we think end of the world. The idea of Revelation, we think of end times. But Jesus is very clear. From the moment that he came and died and was buried and rose again, that was the beginning of the end times. And we are in the end times now to this day. And it's important for us to think about this, because there are people who will be looking for specific signs and saying, I think that this is a prophecy that is fulfilled. This prophecy is fulfilled. And that leads me to another word, the word prophecy in the Bible, or prophetic. It can mean, and does in certain times in the Scripture, mean a forward predictive looking event to occur. However, in the Bible, the idea of prophecy, more often than being predictive, refers to speaking God's truth forth. So if you read the prophets, for example, they were prophesying, they were speaking God's direct truth to kings and to nations or to the people of Israel, and that was considered prophecy. They weren't just saying what's going to happen, they were saying, this is what you're doing right now, stop it. So that's another word that we need to think about when we're approaching how we're going to interpret Revelation. Here are some important passages. There are more than these, but these are some of the big heavy hitters that have to deal with end times. Like I said, these are going to be posted up on the webpage, but it's Revelation, Daniel in the middle section especially, Daniel 12, Joel 2, Matthew 24 is Jesus' primary sermon. It's called the Olivet Discourse, and it's his primary sermon in regards to end times. Mark 13 and Luke 21 are their perspectives on the Olivet Discourse. Thessalonians 2 is where we get that famous passage of there will be two people working in the field, one will be taken up and one will be, the movie line, left behind. That's where the movie title came from. 2 Timothy 3, 2 Peter 3. These are some of the key passages, but there are more, but those are some of the big ones that people will tend to point to. If someone says, I know a verse about the end times, it's generally coming from one of these sections and a handful of others. Now I want to point this out. This is a big, colorful blob. You don't need to worry about reading the text. This is something that as a biblical student, I find fascinating, and this is why I've gone deeper into Revelation this time than I ever have before. And not that we're going to squeeze that slow pace of study into this study. This is one to teach us how to approach Revelation and how to read it. We're going to go through key passages in the coming weeks and key themes and concepts. But this timeline right here, I'll step over here. This is Genesis, and you don't need to be able to read it. This is all the books of the Bible, and there's some space in between. This is a hyperlinked picture of how many times the Bible references another theme or verse in another part of the Bible. So it's insane to me that the Bible is the first and largest hyperlinked book that has ever existed. There are over 340,000 Bible cross-references. So this is Revelation right here. So you can see that Revelation, all of these lines, and there are charts of this where you can zoom in, but all of these lines link to, right here's the Psalms through the prophets. So the New Testament doesn't start till right here. And you can see how much from the Psalms to the prophets goes in and gets very dark in the book of Revelation. So Revelation speaks back into the Old Testament a ton. And the Old Testament has things that speak into Revelation as well. The blue represents Old Testament targets, so the New Testament looking back, and the red represents New Testament targets, so the times that the Old Testament or parts of the New Testament looked forward to something. And you could see these swirls, for example. So in the Gospels, they're pointing to each other a lot, if you notice those swirls. But I just think it's so fascinating that the Bible is this connected. And we have our Bibles, and it's so easy to take them for granted. You know, this is just a regular Bible, and it's 2 columns, and in the middle, these are cross references, and there's little tiny cursive letters. This is what these are pointing to. This is how many there are. And in the book of Revelation, it is one of the most hyperlinked books in the Bible because it's the culmination. It's the book that Revelation is saying, look at all of this Old Testament that finds its culmination and brings it to completion in the book of Revelation. And look at the New Testament books that loop in and loop in and loop in. And the reason this is important is because of this. When we are studying Revelation, if we take an approach like the Left Behind approach, fundamentally what the Left Behind approach did, and this is why I literally never even got to dive into and study it, even though I worked at Calvary Chapels and I had some amazing Calvary Chapel pastor friends and we would talk about it, I would just tell them, it's weird that you approach the book of Revelation unlike the way you approach every other book of the Bible. When you ask, what's the context? Where is it connected in the Bible? What are the previous themes in the Bible that line up and match and sync up and give us more detail about the themes that are in the book of Revelation? Because that's, especially in the Calvary Chapel movement, it's a very verse-by-verse oriented denomination. They wouldn't call themselves a denomination, but they are. And they're very verse-by-verse. But for whatever reason, when it came to the book of Revelation, they had grown up under the Hal Lindsey commentaries, the Schofield Study Bible commentaries, and when they approached it, it's almost like they said, we don't need to approach the book of Revelation like we approach other books of the Bible because Revelation is so different. And yes, it is different, but so are the Psalms different from Isaiah. You approach the Psalms, which are poetry, differently than you approach Isaiah, differently than you approach Kings and Chronicles, which are history. And we know that today. You're not going to approach, for example, and this might not be a good illustration now that I'm saying it out loud for the kids. We're not going to approach the comic strip section of the newspaper. It's definitely not a good illustration for the kids. We're not going to approach the comic strip section of the newspaper the same way we would approach an op-ed, the same way we would approach a stock market report. We know intuitively you read these things with a different lens and emphasis because they are different things. The book of Revelation is a letter. It says so itself. It is a letter to the 7 churches in Asia, so we need to approach it like a letter. It is an apocalyptic book, which means it's meant to reveal something. It doesn't mean it's just talking about the end of the world. It's a letter that's going to reveal something about Jesus, and it's written in a style that was very common to the Jewish people called apocalyptic literature. Just like we read comics and we know this is a comic. I'm going to read this for a laugh or some funny insight. Apocalyptic literature was a genre, and there are plenty of other books outside of the Bible that carried the same sort of theme, where they would use images from the Old Testament, images like the serpent that points back to the garden, images like the tree of life. They would use these images to draw people into this beautiful painting that they wanted to paint for their readers. And this is what God is doing through the Apostle John, using at the time, current form, a current medium of writing and communication to write down an apocalyptic, a revealing story of who Jesus is. So that's just a fun picture for me. This is Bible nerdy, very interesting, 340,000 Bible cross-references. Now I have a short video, and it's 5 minutes long, to talk about apocalypse. So let's go ahead and watch this together. The audio is only coming from the TV, so I do pray it is loud enough. And I pray I know how to start it. That's the other thing.
It's the end of the world. The moon turns to blood, mountains crumble, mutant locusts swarm.
Can you guys hear it?
These are just some of the strange images we find in parts of the Bible called apocalyptic.
And while most people think the biblical word apocalypse means the end of the world, it actually doesn't mean that at all.
So let's talk about how to read apocalyptic literature in the Bible. So wait, the apocalypse doesn't mean the end of the world?
No. Apocalypse is a Greek word that means to uncover or reveal. An apocalypse is when you suddenly see the true nature of something that you couldn't see before.
Because I don't always see things the way they really are.
Right. We all develop familiar ways of seeing the world that can limit or blur our vision.
So an apocalypse is like a revelation.
Right. Now, in the Bible, an apocalypse is when God pulls back the curtain to show someone what's really going on in the world from a divine perspective.
For example,
Take Isaiah the prophet. He's suddenly transported in a vision into God's throne room.
oh right, he's in God's temple, described as a bridge between heaven and earth.
And there, God gives him a divine perspective on Israel's past, present, and their future.
So that Isaiah can bring challenge and comfort to God's people in his own day.
Or think about the Apostle Paul, who was trying to stop the movement of Jesus, but then he gets stopped in his tracks by a vision of the risen Jesus himself.
Yeah, he realizes that he's fighting against the very thing that he's been hoping for, and it changes the course of his life.
So these apocalypses give people a heavenly perspective on their earthly situation, and they can give hope, or they can challenge you.
Or make you change everything.
Now, those are biblical stories about people having an apocalypse. There are also whole sections of biblical books where a prophet describes extended apocalyptic dreams and visions. People call this apocalyptic literature.
And reading these dreams and visions is difficult. I mean, they're filled with strange images. Like, let's take Daniel. He sees ferocious beasts coming up out of a dark sea, trampling people on the land. And then a character called the Son of Man is exalted to rule the world. What is going on?
Yeah, apocalyptic literature is written in a poetic, imaginative style, and it's packed with symbolism.
How can I know what these symbols mean?
Well, first, by studying the rest of your Bible. Apocalyptic imagery is based on biblical design patterns that begin in the book of Genesis and then develop throughout the Bible. Like the chaotic sea in the first sentences of the Bible that God tames but doesn't eliminate as he orders creation. And so the sea becomes an image of danger, death, and cosmic chaos.
And the dry land, which comes out of the sea, is the safe, ordered place where humans are supposed to rule as God's image.
Yes, and also on the land are beasts that humans are supposed to oversee. But keep reading, and the humans are deceived by a beast.
And start acting like violent beasts.
Exactly. Now, sometimes a prophet will tell you what a symbol means. Like in Daniel, we're told those beasts symbolize violent human kingdoms. But more often, the authors just assume you know how to trace an image through the biblical story to understand its meaning.
Now let's look at the last book of the Bible, the Revelation. Because it's one really long vision. The whole thing is an apocalypse.
Yeah, and it works the same way. It begins with John the visionary, transported to God's throne room, where he sees the risen Jesus as the exalted king of the world.
But Jesus is depicted as a bloody lamb.
Right. It's a design pattern, showing how Jesus is the sacrificial lamb from Israel's Passover and from the Day of Atonement. He gave his life for the sins of the world. And then John sees the ultimate beastly dragon, that spiritual power that energizes violent earthly empires. It's cast out by Jesus, the world's true king.
Yeah. Now that reminds me. When I read the Revelation, I'm struck by all this cosmic destruction and violence. I mean, it happens over and over and over.
Yeah, in the Revelation, there are 3 7-part cycles of God's judgment. And it's another design pattern that connects together the stories of the flood, the 10 plagues on Egypt, and the exile to Babylon, and even more. These are moments when humans unleash so much violence and death into the world that God hands them over to self-destruction. It's like a reversal of creation in Genesis chapter 1, as God allows the world and humans to sink back into darkness and disorder.
That's sobering.
It is. But remember, in Genesis 1, God overcame darkness and chaos with his light and light. And so too in the Revelation. The death of Jesus and the death of the world as we know it is the pathway into the renewed creation that began with the resurrection of Jesus.
And so while the Revelation feels like the end of the world,
it's actually about the beginning of the renewed world, where heaven and earth are reunited, and God's human images rule all creation in the love and power of God.
Okay? This is a lot to take in.
It is. And there's a lot in these books that is still hard to understand, but the purpose of Apocalyptic is really clear. To give us a heavenly perspective on our earthly circumstances so that every generation of God's people can be challenged, comforted, and given hope for the future.
Those are the guys over at the Bible Project. And part of your homework this week is going to be to watch at least one, if not both parts. There's a part 1 and 2 of their Revelation outline video. And the videos are all free to watch. You can go to thebibleproject.com and they have Bible overview, or you can literally search on YouTube, The Bible Project Revelation. And these are videos that we've used here to introduce books of the Bible. It will just give you a layout and a structure, because like I said, this is not a Bible study in the sense that we're going to go through every verse of the Bible. We're going to talk about themes and we're going to field a lot of questions. But the primary thing is that I want to equip you to be able to go and read Revelation. That way you go in the future, whether it's next week, or let's say it's November 5th, and you have a question about the end of the world. You won't need to go and ask a theological question of a pastor, because you'll say, I know where I land and why I look at Revelation the way that I do. And these guys will help, I think, cultivate a very healthy and well-rounded view. And that brings us to this. These are the 4 views, the 4 primary views. Now, there are different people who will have nuances, different ways and details of how they will say this is a method of interpreting Revelation. The reason why I stuck with the traditional views rather than some of the new views, for example, the book that I recommend, especially if you're someone who's been in the church for a while, when I say things like tribulation, apocalypse, revelation, when I say things like the millennium, if you already know and have some understanding, I think these are that. There's a book called Reading Revelation Responsibly by Michael Gorman, and he's someone who I have valued his perspectives and how to approach Revelation. He's a New Testament scholar and is specialized now in teaching about Revelation for some time, and he does a very good and fair job of highlighting the positive aspects of these views as well as some of their pitfalls and shortcomings. So let me just go through them. If you take a Bible college class and you go through Revelation, this is what they're going to tell you. If you buy the book, The 4 Views on Revelation, that Jesse used to own, but he loaned it to Jared, and Jared probably lost it. Jared's got it. These are generally the 4 views. Preterist is, everyone say preterist, just get it out. It's a weird word. Preterist. This is the view where most of the prophecies in the book of Revelation were fulfilled during the time of the Roman Empire. So they look at Revelation, all of those images about a dragon, they're going to say that was Rome. And they're going to connect all of these images to something that happened in the time of the Roman Empire. Historicist is the second view. This is the view that approaches Revelation, that says the prophecies of Revelation have been filled throughout church history, not just in the in the period of Rome. So Rome really culminates in a lot of the Revelation prophecies, according to preterists, in 70 AD when the Jerusalem temple was destroyed. Historicists have a much longer stretched out version. They would say, in the historicist view, for example, had a negative slant, especially as time went on, against the papal authorities, the Catholic authorities. So they would say that there was a medieval period, and certain parts of Revelation correlated to that. There's the Reformation period, and certain parts of Revelation applied to that. And that's how they broke it out. So it's looking backwards, saying this all has happened, and there's a little bit at the end that will happen. That's the historicist view. The futurist view, which is the view that is the Left Behind series view, and the only reason I keep mentioning that isn't because I have some vendetta against that view. It's because it's the view that's most highly taught today, and it's a view that I found to have some pretty significant shortcomings just in biblical scholarship and how people even approach the book of Revelation. The futurist view would say that most of the prophecies beyond Revelation 3, so that's where the letters to the 7 churches end, so from Revelation 4 on, the futurist view says Revelation, all those prophecies are still yet to be fulfilled. So in their viewpoint, throughout history, and even as recent as 1948 was a really big one when Israel was named a nation state again, there are futurists who said, ah, I see, that is this part of the book of Revelation. And there are futurists who have gone in very colorful illustration and said, you know those flying beasts that they describe in this verse? Well, we believe those are Apache helicopters. And what they're doing, we wouldn't do in any other biblical area. They're taking something that is in the Bible that has specific connections to Old Testament nuances and Old Testament symbols and images, but instead they hijack it and apply it to something modern, something that the author would have never written or thought about. And this is one of the primary reasons why I'm not a total futurist, why I've never bought into this particular view, because this is essentially saying that God inspired and revealed this majestic vision to John. He wrote all 22 chapters down, but only 3 chapters were for the people that received it. And the rest of the chapters were for someone thousands of years in the future. It's not something that God has ever done. He's never written a book that the majority of it was not applicable to the people that he was writing it to. And this is a book to the letters of the 7 churches of Asia. So this is something that God said, write it to these churches, this whole book. If it was just the first 3 chapters, if it was another real short book of the Bible, we could all clap our way in and end our Bible reading plan early each year, but it's a 22 chapter book. The spiritual or symbolic or idealist, depending on which school you're going to go to, they'll call it one of these names. It's usually the spiritual or the idealist. Often it's the idealist in like the seminary and Bible college books. This is the viewpoint that says most prophecies portray the ongoing cosmic conflict of spiritual realities and the way and may have many fulfillments throughout history. So essentially this view is the one that says Revelation shows us a type of way that God will combat evil, and this pattern will repeat itself, where evil emperors will rise up and God will pour out wrath on them and show his victory, and there will be one day not another micro picture of this where a civil religion and empire rises up and God says, this is not right, turn to Jesus. There will be one day where there will be a final swing of evil and God says, that's it, we're ending the history books. I've saved all who will be saved and the time will be done. Now these are the 4 views, and here's why it's important to know all 4. Because there are nuances, there are slight variations and differences that each of these groups believe within the groups. And the last one, the spiritual or idealist, these are people that can see the value of, yes, there are some prophecies that are future-oriented for sure. There are some prophecies, for example, the idealist would look at the preterists, and the preterist said, look, the Roman Empire is the dragon. The 7 hills are these 7 hills of the Roman Empire that encircle this area. Here's the 7 churches. We can see it all plain as day and with our eyes, so it must be the Roman Empire. The idealist could say, yes, it's that and. It's that and the next time an evil empire rose up. Obviously, I'm going to tip my hat. I'm not going to try to pretend what I am or am not. I had a religion teacher of world religions, and I remember on the very first day of class, this is at a non-Christian college because I wanted to take this class from a secular school. And the very first day of class, my professor got up and he stood up and he said, I want everyone to know that for the entirety of this class, none of you will ever be able to figure out which of these religious viewpoints I personally hold. And I raised my hand, first day of class. I said, I know which one you're not. And he said, how could you possibly know that? I said, because Jesus said, if you deny me before men, I will deny you before the Father in heaven. So unless you're going to risk that, I know you're not a Christian. And he said, you're right. You will never know which one of these, other than Christian, I am not, until the end of class. It was a very interesting thing for me because I'm not going to try to pretend and hide and veil what I am. I'm just going to say, this is what I am. Here are some of the weaknesses as we go on throughout this study of this particular viewpoint. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, but the view that I land on, and it really wouldn't be categorized by one of these. I've latched on to one of the titles from Reading Revelation Responsibly. I am very much in the poetic, pastoral way of interpreting the book of Revelation, which means I'm going to land here, and I'm going to look at Revelation as a book that teaches us how God deals with evil and how he combats it in these micro pictures throughout history. And those are all foreshadowing the ultimate picture of the ultimate death of evil in the end times. But the reason Revelation is good for us is because we are all going to live through seasons of empires. We are in the middle of an empire right now. America is a great empire just in an historical sense. We have great military power. We have still to this point the majority of economic superiority. People use the dollar as their reference point. And one day, I believe, if Jesus does not return, or if this is not leading us to the final end point where God says, you see all these rhythms in history, the Roman Empire, and it goes down. The Greek Byzantine Empire growing up, the church splitting here, the Catholic Church gaining power, the Church of England and the church in the West gaining power, and how King James united the faith, and he twisted it to be his own sort of variation of the faith so he could get away with sin, and God brought them down low. These are all pictures that flow in the same version of the Roman Empire, where there's a great emperor who leads a persecution. And God shows micro pictures that are all pointing toward the ultimate reality when one day there will be a cosmic world-ending moment. So that's that. And I know that there are people who probably have specific questions or examples. I just want to give you one example that might help, because I know that if you come to Revelation class, you're thinking rapture, you're thinking one world government, you're thinking Mark of the Beast. So I've been using Mark of the Beast as a very simple example. Where's the Mark of the Beast going to be? Does anyone know? Either in your forehead or your hand. Now, is it going to be a microchip? A tattoo? Does it have to be in your forehead or hand? Is there a way to have the Mark of the Beast without it being on your forehead or hand? Now here's where I want to point something out. If you just read Revelation and didn't have in mind, or maybe you just weren't familiar enough with the whole biblical story, you wouldn't realize that in the greatest, one of the most important texts to the Jewish people is Deuteronomy 6, the Shema. And in that passage of the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. In the instructions on what to do with the Shema, it says, put it on your doorposts, write it on your gateways, put it on the frontlets of your eyes, put it on your hands, put it wherever you'll remember it. And to this day, if you go to Israel, you'll see, or if you look up pictures, especially like at the Wailing Wall, you'll see devout Orthodox Jews with a little box on their head. In that box is the Shema. And it's scrolled up and put inside of there, and some of them wear it in a bracelet on their hand, and they scroll it up. Some of them have little spring coils on their doorposts, and they scroll up just that Shema verse in Hebrew, and they put it there. Now, a Hebrew scholar sees this instantly. As modern Western readers who love the New Testament, who dabble in the Old Testament every January to February 13th, we wouldn't instantly go to this. But the readers of Revelation, when they saw, the mark of the beast, 666. If you take the mark 666 on your head or your hand, that must be the mark of the beast. But the Jewish audience and the people who were familiar with the biblical story also knew something else about God. That 7 throughout the Bible represents completion. That 3 throughout the Bible represents perfection. And God's numbers are 7 and 3 because God is perfectly complete, which means 666 is 3 sixes. So Satan, the kingdom of Satan, the kingdoms of this world, no matter how much utopia we can get, no matter how much quantitative easing we can print to give money to people, no matter how much free health care, we can never reach a perfect world. This world will always be perfectly incomplete. It is 3 sixes. It is a perfectly incomplete world. When you turn to something that is not God to find your sense of completion, wholeness, satisfaction, significance, the things I say in messages all the time. So if you're reading this, you would have known the Jewish backstory because the earlier Christians were much better at teaching the entirety of the Bible. They would have known 666 doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a tattoo. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily some new cryptocurrency from Bill Gates and a microchip or some vaccine where they're going to sneak a grain of rice in my hand and that's how I'm going to buy things because it's already in my phone and on my Apple Watch. Like that's why some people I only wear my Apple Watch on my left hand because if it's on my right hand, that might be the mark of the beast because I could buy things with it. And I say, no, the point of it isn't to say that there's going to be something that's going to migrate. Like all of a sudden they're going to say, no more Apple Watches. Now Tim Cook is going to put the screen only in the back of your hand. Like that'd be very obvious. Like if you don't think that people in these corporations have not read the Bible, somebody's there and their board's going to be like, hey, I read the Bible, might affect our sales. No, it's much more symbolic. That people are going to align themselves, not with God, but with something that's less perfect than God. And it's often not going to be the thing that we look at and say, that is evil. It's going to be something that has a lot of the qualities of God, but falls short. And it's going to demand our allegiance, and we're going to give that our allegiance. And it's going to be a perfectly incomplete, it's going to be a knockoff version of God's power, of God's holiness, of God's purity. And that's just one example of approaching something in the idealist or spiritualist way. I'm not saying one day they're going to tattoo us or microchip us. I'm not saying that it can't happen, but I'm saying that in the Bible it is very clear that this is what John is doing. He's saying, you know that thing that all of us do? Put the verse here, remember it here, put it everywhere. There's going to be another way of thinking. There's going to be another creed to put in front of our eyes. There's going to be another creed to put on our hand. There's going to be another creed to put on our doorposts. And the people that follow that creed, the creed that's not from Yahweh the Creator, those are the people who fall short. Those are the people who give themselves over to live for something that's not God. So that's just one example of a very common thing that's talked about, the mark of the beast, the number 666. Because since I've been in my memory age, Ronald Reagan, his name could somehow be 666. Barack Obama, his name could be 666. Trump, Bill Gates. I've heard every of these big political, moving, leader, world shaker types. Like, I think their number, if you equate this letter of their name with this number, then it must be that is the Antichrist. The Antichrist, the book of Revelation says, will be a very winsome person. They're going to draw people in. And it's not going to be because they're just going to say, everyone denounce the God of the Bible. They're going to have some feel. As a matter of fact, Satan is a knockoff artist. He's not original. In the end times, in the book of Revelation, it's talking about how Satan mimics aspects of what God does, but to a cheaper degree. He has his person sustain an injury that leads almost to death and then makes a miraculous recovery. It's a knockoff because he can't rise from the dead, but he can sure feign rising from the dead. So this is an example, and these are the four primary ways of approaching it. I am in the pastoral, prophetic, poetic way of looking at this. I will see things that, yes, they will happen in the future just as they happen in the past. I'm not locked into saying they all will happen in the past, or they all will happen in the future, or they all happen in the first century. I will say what happened in the first century is a type of what we see in Revelation, where great evil rose up and God brought judgment, and the Roman Empire is no more. It happened throughout history in different seasons, because it goes like this. It will happen in the future, and one day it will all happen in a final reality-driven culmination, completion of it. So the big thing that you need to think about is this, and this will help you decide how do I think we should approach Revelation. Is Revelation a code to be cracked, or is it a lens through which you look through? And this is very important, because the majority of books, the majority of TV shows, the majority of pop culture revelation, surface level study will treat it as a code to be cracked. There was a guy, and I don't know if it was a national news, but it was definitely California news. I want to say it was like now 7 years ago. It was right before I moved here. There was a guy who bought billboards up and down the Interstate 5, and he posted, "This is the day the world is going to end," up and down the California highway. And guess what? We're here. He's still here. And he had to say something weird about it. There are multiple cults that have tried to make similar statements about it. Jesus himself said, "No one knows the day or the hour of my return." The Son doesn't even know. When Jesus was on earth, he said, "I don't even know. As I'm walking here, I don't know." Now, most people speculate that after he rose again, all of his earthliness was shed off, and he once again was unified in all the knowledge. But for him to be walking around saying, "Look, my dad knows, but none of y'all know." So anytime you see someone say, "I've cracked the code. We know the day. We know the hour. This is when the rapture's coming. This is when you're going to get sucked up," which I don't even believe will happen before the tribulation. For other reasons, we're going to get there in future days. But today we just have to say, how am I approaching it? Now, if you're thinking, which is the right way? Generally, we approach the majority of the Bible as a lens. There are certain parts that are symbolic, but if you look at how you read the Bible, look at how biblical scholars, how pastors throughout all of Christian history, the majority of the way people have read the Bible is not as some secret code to be cracked, although some have tried. Some have written books to try to crack the codes and even use the verse numbers, which is interesting because the verse numbers didn't even come about for many, many, many centuries after the Bible was compiled finally in 398 AD. but people have tried to do this sort of code cracking. The Bible is a lens through which we can see life. It's a lens that gives us the ability to see the world more as God created it and less as our sin has tainted it. But that leads us to this this chart, just to help plot where you are. There's a past focus, a present focus as you read the Revelation, or a future focus. On this side, it's seeing the text as a lens, which means you're thinking analogically through it, and you're discerning similarities of themes in the Bible. This end represents the text as a code. The strategy would be decoding or deciphering, finding the secret way to look into God's Word and discovering precise correspondence. So for example, well, in 1948, when Israel became a nation state, that equates to this verse in Revelation. It therefore must be that this is when Jesus is going to return, because we're going to take the math from Daniel and blah, 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 blah. That's how that works. Now, all the four models are all on here. This is where I land, right here. On this side, I'm seeing text as a lens, and I'm seeing that there are parts of Revelation that point to patterns in the past. There are parts of Revelation that will show us how God is going to deal with difficult patterns that will arise that are similar to these in the future. But as a pastor-driven person, as a pastor-driven Bible nerd, I want to say, okay, where are we in the patterns of evil in history, and how can I speak God's comfort and truth in the presence of Christ and the power and victory that Christ will have with where we are on this curve, with where we are in this ebb and flow of history, without saying, because people are going to ask me, and I'm sure it's going to be in the questions, when is the rapture? When do you think the rapture is going to happen? And we're going to get to that because I think Revelation speaks to that, but it's not the primary emphasis. It's a book that's designed to reveal the beautiful, grand painting of Jesus and how he shows his victory pattern throughout history in micro pictures, because one day, the big picture, he will bring an end to it all. But I will always lean on approaching it like a lens, because that's how I approach all the other books of the Bible. I don't read the Psalms and say, okay, Psalm 1 minus Psalm 91 will equal somewhere in the middle of Psalm 117, verse 2b. And that verse now means this. And that's obviously being hyperbolic, but it's just to prove a point that if we get caught up in this, it's very easy to get caught up in trying to crack a code, because we want to feel like we have discovered something that's new that no one else has ever discovered. But I think what happens is, at least in a Christian formation sense, we actually miss out on the depth and the beauty and the strength that we can learn and glean from Revelation when we see God's victory pattern, and how all of these little patterns are just small fractals of how he's going to end the world and end all death, evil, and suffering at one point in the end of time. So anyway, the four views, that's them. And here I am, the poetic, prophetic, pastoral. It's just where I land. I want to look at the analogies and symbols in the context of the entire Bible. If it's talking about a dragon, I'm saying, where are dragons in the Bible? If it's talking about millennium, I want to say, where are millenniums in the Bible? And I want to say, what did the original audience think? What would have the people that John had these letters delivered to, what would they have heard with what they knew about God's story? That's where I'm going to go political. The Bible is a vastly politically charged book. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but understanding political climates in light of God's kingdom. God's kingdom is always here. Political climates will do this. We are in the midst of, in my opinion, a growing political unrest. Not really my opinion, it's just we open our eyes. Since I've been alive, it's the most unrest I've ever seen politically. So all of a sudden, some of these pictures of what God does are coming into clearer focus and saying, okay, if we're heading toward these types of wars, if slavery is at this massive high, this oppression of people, the oppression of the broken, today, as far as I know, there's still more slaves today than there ever were at the height of slavery. Now, some of this is because of population, but some of this is because there's over 27 million children and women that are being trafficked today. And that's not even now counting the Uyghur Muslims, the millions of them that are being imprisoned in concentration camps today in China. So slavery and oppression and injustice is on the rise. Empires are rising up with immense military might, and the Bible has a lot to say about that in the book of Revelation. Prophetic is focusing on the explicit eternal truths rather than the ambiguous images. So I will always, in my Bible study, people say, how do you study the Bible? How do you interpret it? I always tell people, start with the explicitly, clearly stated truths in the Bible and use those truths to help you interpret and understand the less clear truths. You never want to do it the other way around. You never want to take something that's unclear, that's more ambiguous, and create a framework that you then use to interpret the rest of the Bible. You always want to take the explicit things, which is why I tell people, read the Gospels, read Romans. Those will give you a very clear framework, especially for a Western way of thinking. And you begin to build your theology and your system and take the clear things like love your neighbor, help the poor, care for the orphans. Jesus laid down his life for you so that you can be made whole in him. Take these clear things and then go interpret the different passages. Like, why are there beings around God's throne screaming covered in eyeballs? Don't use that passage and say, this is what I'm going to build all of my biblical theology around. This thing that I can't understand and seems really, really weird. Or even Revelation for that matter. A dragon with 10 horns and 7 mountains and lampstands and angels and things speaking and John can see but not hear. Like, we don't need to build a whole theology around the ambiguous. We need to build it around the explicit and let that inform the way we interpret the ambiguous, less easily understandable or less on the surface apparent passages in Scripture. And then pastoral, I'm here for the formation of the church, capital C church. So for me, these are the components that I will approach teaching Revelation with and in. So that's it for today. I went a little longer than I thought. If you have questions, here's what I want you to do. Any questions you have, and I don't want you to dismiss a question because maybe you're here and you're like, whoa, I just thought this was about like Left Behind, like that's what we did. If you have those questions, send those in because I want to tackle the questions that you have in coming weeks. We're not going to do it tonight. You can email me, you can text me. My number is 813-444-7170. I've given it out 100,000 times. If you've not read the book of Revelation, here's your homework for this week. Watch the first Bible Project Revelation overview video. You can find it on YouTube for free. It's a video. It looks like a person's drawing with a calligraphy brush on a canvas with little pictures of men and shows you how Revelation's broken up. There's 2 parts. If you watch both of them, it'd be the length of a sitcom, about 20 minutes. I think each minute is give or take 10 to 12 minutes for Revelation Part 1 and Part 2. That'll show you how the structure of the book is laid out. And the other homework I want you to do, now this is a bigger time ask, but it's more of a blessing ask. If you've never read Revelation, either listen to it or read it this week. It's an hour and a half. So break down your commute or your daily walk. Let's say you're like me and your watch says walk for 30 minutes a day. That's 3 walks. And I get the book, if I just put on my audio Bible, put in my AirPods and walk. That's 3 walks. And you don't need to understand it. I just want your brain to begin to hear it. To begin to hear the letters to the churches, to begin to hear the picture of Jesus being revealed, to begin to see the picture that God gives John of the dragon being killed, to see the picture in Revelation 20 of the dragon being cast into a pit and chained up for 1,000 years, and to see the picture of the new heavens and the new earth. You don't need to understand it, but I want you to begin to absorb it. If you want, I don't know if I've done it through the New Living, but Don and I were talking before. If you get the New Living Translation, it's the NLT on your Bible app. It usually, for most books of the Bible, has sound effects. I have no idea what the sound effects would be with Revelation, like boom, roar, I don't know. But you can check that out. It does help you listen longer, right? Because the sound effects, the different voices, it's pretty cool. So that's Revelation week 1. For those of you who want to study it and maybe you want to dive in as you're studying, I knew that there'd be more people in this, but here's some fun little guides. And it's just the book of Revelation on one side, and it's got blank lines for you to journal on the other. I brought, how many are there, Jesse? There are 3 of those left. If you want a fist fight for those, may the greatest fighter win. And that's in the version, my primary reading version, not the one I've been preaching out of. It's a very literal version of the Bible, the English Standard Version. But they're nice to have for Bible studies because it's just one book of the Bible and it gives you a chance to journal through when you go through it a little more slowly. Here's the books that I was talking about, and there are a couple more I have up here. Because people ask about the Revelation or the rapture, here's a book that's got 3 views of the rapture. We will cover this in class in the later weeks. Here's a book about the 4 views of the millennium. It's the 1,000-year reign of Christ, Revelation 20. Are we here? What are we doing? What's our job? What in the world is the millennium about? Does the millennium exist? But Bible nerd book. If you're like, okay, I know a lot of these Bible terms, right? When you say millennium, I've heard that. I kind of think I know what that is. When you say rapture, I've heard that. If that's you, but you're intrigued by like this holistic Bible approach, this book will destroy you and from the inside out. I think you're reading it right now, or you just got it from Derek, and I'm pretty sure it destroyed Derek. Like he read it and was like, I can't believe, what are we doing? Here we go. And he's really forming his theology and adjusting a lot of things. This book, Revelation 4 Views, I've already purchased it and loaned it out twice, so I quit. I just bought it on Kindle, and so I can't lose it again. That's what I'm doing now. After I lose a bunch of books by giving them out, I buy them on the Kindle because it's impossible to lose them. But that's one that goes through every passage in Revelation, and it literally has 4 columns. It says, here's the preterist view, here's the historicist view, here's the futurist view, here's the idealist view. And it does a relatively good yet simple job of showing you commentary on each passage in Revelation. And we're only going to hit some of the big passages. We're going to, for example, we're going to tackle the 7 churches in 1 week. We're going to tackle the revelation of Jesus in the image of him coming back on the horse with the sword and the tattoo and the fire in his eyes, 1 week. We're going to do the kingdom of heaven 1 week. So we're not going to do justice to these passages. And this one is interesting. And I thought this is an interesting book because it's the last days according to Jesus. This is a book on how to view the end times, not from Revelation, but from the Olivet Discourse. So only what Jesus said about the end times before Revelation was written when he was speaking to his followers. So it's just an interesting way. There's a lot of ways to think and process the book of Revelation, but it is to get us to know Christ better, for him to be revealed. And that's what my hope and prayer is for you guys and for you guys. And I will, Arnie, I will, yes, the journals are on Amazon. These books, I will post links on the Facebook page so you guys can see the links to all of these books and a couple other ones. The journals I bought on Amazon, I think they're like less than $10. I want to say less than $10, give or take. Like $8 or $9 for those journals. Bible Project homework. Bible Project Revelation overview on YouTube. It looks like someone's drawing calligraphy art with little stick men. And then read or listen to the book of Revelation. I know you're like, that's so much time. And I know this is such a cliche pastor thing. How much time were we watching Netflix? How many episodes of Criminal Minds did I watch last week? I could have read the book of Revelation so many times probably because I got back from vacation. And on vacation, I just watched so much Criminal Minds in the RV. So let's really put our minds and hearts to this, and then we're going to jump in next week. And like I said, we're going to be just skipping along and emphasizing how do we interpret some of these major themes. Without your questions, I'm just going to go with my plan. With your questions, I'll be able to answer. So if you're on Facebook, please just drop your questions. I'll go back through, and if you could just put something so I can find it quickly, like just put a couple exclamation points or something at the front, or just put a capital Q. That way I don't have to read through all the hellos and such. I can just find the questions and jot them down. And same for you guys. Shoot me an email. God bless us as we start this incredible journey to understand this book that has been so ambiguous for so many. But God, you don't do ambiguous alone. This book is not, it's not titled ambiguous. It's titled Reveal. So reveal, Lord. Reveal what you wanted to reveal through the Apostle John to the people that lived and read this letter at the time, and to us who live and read it today, so that our faith and trust in you can grow. Godspeed. God be with you. Amen. Bye, online people. On the back.
Only $6.
$6 for the scripture journals.
If you have a library card, you get 2 out of 3 of those on the internet for free.
If you have a library card, you can get 3 of those on the internet for free. They can hear you.
You're informing everybody, Dawn.